So I've been told recently by my fiance that I am an optimist. But if I am, I guess I'm an optimist who feels like Armageddon is just around the corner. In a new preaching series, we'll be looking at reasons we can feel confident, even in a world or in personal lives that seem like they're in crisis. How can we find our confidence in this current climate of instability? Panel, thank you for joining us tonight. I guess first, it's a bit of a scary question, but what are our reflections or concerns about the current season we're living in, Matt?
Sure, I think I don't ever really recall a time where more people have considered what's next. Coming through COVID, coming out of COVID, people losing jobs, people changing jobs, people moving cities. It feels like everyone's had a reset button in front of them, and so that's been confidence draining, I think, for so many people across politics, across economics. We're still kind of crawling our way out of a cost of living crisis. It's I've never known it.
And Francesca, you've got a podcast where you're, I guess, touching on these themes. Yeah. What are the things that stand out for you?
Right now, if I'm being totally honest, I feel like I'm very concerned about how desensitized we are as a generation of, what is actually happening in this world. Like if I scroll on Instagram, I will easily see somebody passing away and these are brutal deaths as well. Like there is no real concern or empathy for what's actually happening in this world. We're so easy to just like it and scroll by. It's just so sad to me. So I feel like we're very desensitized to what's actually happening around us. And everybody has their own definition of what's good and what's bad, what's good and what's evil. And I think that really leaves a lot of people in confused places and spaces. So,
wow. I mean, I guess in that kind of sense of compassion fatigue can hit us all, right? I mean, we're at a time of, there's at least 3 wars going on as we film that. We've got one that's been going on in Ukraine for quite some time, Russia on Europe's doorstep. We've got this hideous conflict in the Middle East. There's one in Sudan that we're not even really reporting on. And that's just wars. We've had a pandemic. I think environmental issues stand above all of this. Tunde, how do you, does this weigh upon you as you're walking through your daily life? Or do you think we have sort of like learned to live with these things, or are learning to live with these things in some ways?
I think honestly, no. I think the reality is it really doesn't weigh on me, because I think in some ways my capacity to carry it just doesn't exist. There is so much going on in the world that when I think about my own situation and family and just the immediate challenges that are in front of me, I think on just that alone, that feels heavy enough that actually I can't comprehend the things that are actually happening in the rest of the world. So no, I don't think I carry, I don't think I feel the weight of it. I think I, in some ways, just ignore it.
Annie, you're working in the NHS. We used to say the NHS was living in crisis. Now we practically say the NHS has collapsed. And you're in that day after day. How do you, can you retain confidence in that?
I think it is hard. You feel, I feel very much like I'm in a rock and a hard place, wanting to provide something that I can't provide. So it feels quite frustrating. Waiting lists are growing, and I sometimes just have to I guess a lot of stuff I feel weighs really heavy on me. So I have to just not think about it, not go there, which I'm not convinced that's always the right thing to do. But like if I think about every kid that's on my waiting list and what impact that has on a family, like it's crushing. So I just think, okay, it's numbers and I can only do what I can do. So that is what I have to do. But it does weigh, it weighs heavy, I think. So I have to be a bit careful about how much I let it weigh on me.
I mean, George, we're already seeing a range of opinions. You run services here on a Sunday evening. You're obviously getting some of that. Where do you start to bring God into the equation to help people dealing with this massive stuff?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's an important question. I think if anything, it makes it easier to bring God into the conversation, because I think we have a world that is not as trustworthy as we thought it was. It doesn't stay the same like we thought it was previously. I mean, who would have imagined that during COVID, you wouldn't have been allowed to go to the shop or you wouldn't have been allowed to be outside for more than an hour. And suddenly all the things that maybe we could have assumed in that world pre-COVID, that it just doesn't exist anymore, we couldn't have assumed. And so I think what I'm learning and what I'm seeing is that young people particularly, are desperate for something they can trust, desperate for something they can be confident in. And we have that as a Christian, as someone who trusts and loves Jesus, trusts the Bible and what it teaches. I think we have the only permanent thing, the only thing we can rest on and live our lives for and trust, and the only person we can trust forever. So yeah, I think that's how it plays in. I think if anything, it makes it more obvious than maybe if you're in a place of you've got lots of money, or you're sure about what your future is. Oh, I'm young, I've got lots of time, those kind of things. I think those are slowly fading out. I think even young people can say, I need something now, and I can't be sure that my life will be what I thought it was, or I'm going to have these hopes, I'm going to own this house, I'm going to have this family, have this job, live here. It's going to be a peaceful country. We can't be sure of those things. And so I think people more and more are looking for something they can trust.
And I think those sort of insecurities that we're all walking around with, obviously everyone's got very different. You wouldn't want to even think about the insecurities I've got. But the sort of range of insecurities that are around there are affecting everybody in all sorts of different ways. I think this series is going to touch on a number of topics. One of the ones that just sort of came to mind there is they're talking about confidence in our own skin. And Sophie, you've spoken an awful lot about the identity debate, for instance. How does that strike you? Where do you get your confidence from? And how do you see this topic, well, affecting as it is so many people?
Yeah. It's a massive thing at the moment, I think. People, in terms of gender, in terms of where they fit in the world. Am I a man? Am I a woman? Am I living up to some expectation of what it means to be a man or woman? I personally, as you know, had gender dysphoria for a long time. I thought I was male for like 25 years, more than that, in fact. And I only really came out of it through a slow process in learning what God says about me, rather than trying to put my identity in. I think I was like kind of rebelling against, like, oh, well, I'm not like other girls, so I'm just going to reject all the feminine stuff. And then I went really far the other way, thinking, no, but I want to be a good Christian woman. So what does that mean? And then I went too far the other way, and I stripped back all the kind of things that make me me, and the kind of the different things about me, I suppose. But yeah, I came to this place where I'm like, I don't want what the world says about a girl should be like this to define me, or to rebel against it even. I found that what God says about me, which is that, he's made me intentionally. I'm not an accident, and that he's got plans for me and unique gifts that he's given me. And it doesn't matter if my gifts are maybe more seen as masculine or they're seen as feminine. It's like we've all got gifts. So you could be a really sensitive, emotionally intelligent guy who's, great in an emotional crisis, or you could be a really level-headed, like strong, assertive woman. And like those are gifts that God's given us to run in and to serve the church and to help people, actually. So yeah, coming into that is what alleviated that gender dysphoria and brought me to a place of peace with myself.
I guess what really strikes me there about what you're saying is your incredible courage and bravery to be so, but in a sense, be so open as you are also on media and social media, about quite a polarizing issue.
Yeah.
And also, is there a sense of like, I mean, me and Matt are both, frankly, old men. We sort of grew up in a time where like the idea of like what a male was pretty broad.
Yeah.
And what a woman was pretty broad.
Yeah.
And it seems that now we've sort of retreated those parameters. And I'm guessing that in itself is, if you're growing up with that, is quite a terrifying prospect as well.
It's actually ironic because this idea of gender, this new movement of gender ideology, it uses the words of being inclusive, and we're trying to make femininity or femaleness inclusive. But actually what it's doing is really narrowing down, as you say, what it means to be female, to, lipstick or walking a certain way, or macho-ness for men. And, so it does make the people that are more maybe like the tomboys of the past, where, you don't really see tomboys much anymore. They're not really allowed to be tomboys because it's like, well, if you would rather play football and climb a tree, well, then maybe you're a boy, I'm talking about girls, obviously. And if you like dancing and, you know, and pink and pretty things, then maybe you're a girl. I mean, surely that's sexist. That just sounds sexist to me. So I think, you know, the idea of sex in the Bible, as in God made man and woman, is much more inclusive than the idea of gender, because it's like, you know, if you're this 4 billion people, you know, are women, 4 billion are men. And it's like there's such a diversity and range of personality types within that binary. So I think that's actually way more sort of progressive way of looking at it.
Amazing. Gosh, I mean, there's so much there in what you've just said. I guess it's also incumbent upon us as Christians, I'll take all Christians in on this tables, to be as compassionate as we possibly can be to whatever anyone is going through or thinks they are. So how do we engage in these debates that can be so polarizing, I guess, in a compassionate way as well? I don't know, Jesse, have you got any ideas of, I mean, you're coming into the church as an intern, these topics I'm sure surrounding you a little bit as well. How do you try to maintain your compassion for everyone in the face of sometimes these things?
Yeah, I think we just need to remind ourselves that we're called to be Christ-like. And when Jesus walked on this earth, he loved everybody. And I think it's reminding yourself that, okay, we believe something different, but it's not about our beliefs versus theirs. It's about, okay, how can we relate to them? And how can we get to the seed of where all of this insecurity is coming from in them and love them through it? I think it's sometimes quite a gear shift of having conversations with these people who are hurt and sometimes hurt by the church. And it's how can we, as Christians who are part of a church that may have hurt them, love them into a conversation that is honoring for them and honoring for us, and in a way that is us standing firm in what we believe, but also open to listening to them. Because I think it's really important to be able to hear them and not almost belittle them because we're like, we're right and you're wrong, but in a way that we come up next to each other and love them through it. If you think it's like two lines crossing, I think we need to be two lines that come together rather than cross. So it's just reminding yourself and just praying into it and being like, God, give me strength in this, give me wisdom to relate to this person and love them through it, give me patience. So yeah.
Brilliant. Tunde, you work in IT, right? And I guess coming out of the back of COVID, we're also getting used to working from home and probably being more cut off in our little workstations. We're not even in workstations in an office anymore. We're literally in our own cupboards and things. Do you think, I guess this is a question for everyone, but are we getting better at listening, or are we finding listening in itself more difficult nowadays, do you think?
There's no way we're getting better at listening. And I think I find that people really value the ability to listen. One of the things I found coming out of the pandemic was just taking the time to get to know the people that you work with. So I started a new job in the middle of the pandemic. I didn't meet them physically for about a year or so. And just that time to ask, how are you? You could really see how it started to change that working relationship. So I think we definitely took a few steps back in the pandemic in terms of learning how to listen. But I think we really appreciate being deeply heard. I think it's a really powerful thing to be able to sit there and give your time and attention to someone. And it definitely does. It definitely does make a big difference.
I guess when we're thinking about work and our confidence in work, it can fall one of two ways, can we? We touched on identity before, and your identity, who you are, can be the person. Look at me. I'm a TV reporter sitting here, so obviously, my identity is, my work. But also, how do we keep that under control? How do we stop that getting out of hand? And then going the other way, what if you hate your work? What if you don't enjoy your work? Well, what if work ultimately is fulfilling, it's one duty of basically hopefully paying the bills, but then you can't believe. How do we keep a godly perspective? How do we keep our confidence in him moving amongst the two sides of that coin, I guess? What would you say, Tunde?
I think something that helped me a few years ago was just realizing that anything I do, whether it's so mundane or so intentional, it's all unto God. It is all unto God. So it's all for God. And I think that helps when it's not necessarily easy, because actually I realize that the way I live, the way I model this working role might be the only glimpse that person gets of what it looks like to interact with a Christian. And so, so whether that's a positive thing, whether work is a great thing and it's something that's going well, whether it's a horrible thing, and as you said, it's just to get paid and take care of another aspect of life, just recognizing that actually it is all part of our life as a Christian. So it is an opportunity. It is a moment to represent Christ in our everyday. And I guess the other side to that is the reality is we'll spend 7.5, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week in most cases for 40 odd years of our life. A depressing thought, but it would be a wasted opportunity if it was just something we did and collected that paycheck and took care of life. It would be such a waste to think 40 years of life gone for just a mundane thing. So that thought really does help me especially through the low points, realizing that there's more to it than just kind of showing up. Nice.
And Addy, I'm guessing for yourself, from the outside, we all look at people working in the NHS, we put you on a massive pedestal. Obviously, you're amazing. We take so much pride in you. We hope you carry a lot of pride in what you do. And at the same time, we're constantly talking about how the NHS has let us down. It did this. I didn't get that. Walls are crumbling. How do you negotiate that? Yeah, where do you start, right?
I think I love the idea that God stepped down to lift people up. So when I think about nursing, I remember while I was training, I basically wanted to work with people. And I don't know if it really mattered whether I went into teaching or any other kind of thing. I just wanted to be with people and landed on nursing. And God really spoke to me in my second year about how he's the one who steps down to lift people up. And I guess I feel like I've got that opportunity and that privilege when people are at low points. No one wants to be in hospital. It's no one's idea of a day out or a week out. It's rubbish if you're there. And sometimes I actually hate it because I'm like, I hate that there's so many sick people. And I know that isn't God's plan, and one day it won't be. But while it is there, I get to be his hands and his feet and try and, love and care for people in difficult situations. And I kind of love when people I know are in hospital and they see a familiar face. It's an encouragement. It's a lift. You're like, oh, there's someone here that I know. And I'm like, I get to be that person. And I find that a real privilege. And I think as well, when we talk about loving people and how we're called to make disciples, and that's done on a one-to-one, isn't it? You love people one at a time, most of the time. And so for me, in those moments where I get to be with one kid or one parent or one family, and I get to love in that moment, and it's tricky because you can't. I feel like I'd love to tell people that I'm a Christian and want to pray for them, and I nearly did the other day, but I was like, I could also lose my job, so I'm still not sure how to navigate that. But I can pray and just love that position I have where I get to encourage people and look after people in my workplace. I see it as a real privilege.
And another one of the topics is confidence in the gospel, George. And I'm guessing from the range of discussion we're having there, you, as a church leader, you've got to feel pretty buoyant that, we're getting that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think it's a question people are asking. I think it's one of the things we have to think about as we love one another as Christians and help each other live out our lives in the world. Like, how do we be confident in a gospel that is deeply offensive to the people around us? I think we talked about polarization, living in different bubbles and things like that. And if I'm in a work environment where people are living in an entirely different world to me, with an entirely different worldview and thought, and maybe they vote differently to me and they look differently to me, and I'm really struggling to engage with that, how am I then confident enough that I'm not going to offend, I'm not going to get in trouble if I say something? I'll preach the gospel to someone, speak about Jesus and what he might say about your life. How do I know that's not going to affect me in the workplace? I think for students as well, how do you exist on a campus where, particularly in the city of Brighton, there's campuses where these certain viewpoints are put forward strongly and other ones are definitely shut out? How can you be confident? How can you stand up for your faith? These are some of the big questions, I think, at the moment for us as Christians and for us as leaders to try and help people with. What are you going to do on Monday morning? Someone asks you a difficult question about something really important to them, and you know the truth, but you also know, if I say the truth, this could get me in trouble. How do you navigate that? I think it's really important.
The books we read, the films we watch, the music we listen to is always on another topic. And that topic is generally, the greatest love of all is for yourself. Sophie, how do you negotiate? Go negotiate that conflict.
Yeah, you're right. Everything in our culture is me, 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 me. Like, how do you live your best life? If this isn't working for you, then just like toss it and do this instead. And it's amazing how counter-cultural and how counterintuitive what Jesus taught is, because he just turns everything upside down. He says, the greatest among you is the servant, the person who serves. There's a proverb that says, he who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. And I remember I had a bit of free time at one point, and I was thinking, I felt like God was asking me to serve someone. And so my friend had just had a baby, and I didn't know anything about babies, didn't care about babies, frankly, but she had a newborn, so I was like, oh, well, maybe I can help her with it. And I just every week just started helping look after this baby, and it changed something in me, weirdly. I found that just through changing nappies and stuff like that and serving, I found more of God. It's really weird, but like I've found again and again and again the things that God has said, which are really counterintuitive, which is, and it's always like, look away from yourself and look at God. And that's the opposite of what we're taught in culture. I also do think that it's really important for us to just to look at the person of Christ. I think in our culture, we're very like airy-fairy about spirituality and like, well, that's cool for you, and that's you do crystals and you do like Reiki or you've got some spiritual like manifestation thing going on, and it doesn't really matter as long as you're happy. And I think coming back to the idea that there is what is the question of, is there actually something that's true? Like, is there actually a God? Like, for me, I think that's really, really important that we knuckle down to work out, like, is there a God? And if so, what is he like? Because we need to know who he is, if he's there, so we know how to live our lives. And that's been really, really important to me. And so I think the difference with Christianity is from just a kind of general idea of a vibe God, of like, oh, I think there's probably something out there. I think most people I speak to think there's something out there, like a higher power or something. But in Christianity, well, obviously it centers around the person of Christ. And so we've actually got someone who all, historians will attest to say, this is a real man who lives in history. We've got, good historical records of what he said. And so we actually have something that we can look at in a concrete way and say, is this man legit? Like, he claimed to be God. And so, like, I often talk about this with people who haven't really thought about this. I'm like, he claimed to be God. He went around claiming to be God. And so you can't just say, oh, well, he's just this nice guy, because he can't, if he's going around claiming to be God, then he's either like mental, like he thinks like that. There are actually a lot of mentally ill people who think that they're the Messiah or the Christ, or he's malevolent and evil, a charlatan. He knows he's not God, but he's doing it to trick people. Or he actually is who he said he is. He actually is God. And so I always say to people, like, I know that you kind of, if you're asking questions about God, whether there's a God, you know, you can actually drill down into this and work out, like, do you think he's just a madman? And that, you know, we've had thousands of years of, you know, the culture and morality based off his teachings? Or, you know, do you think he was a charlatan trying to trick people, but then he gave his whole life to service? So how does that work? You know, why would he, you know, trick people? He made no money, he had no benefit. And I think, you know, if you look at his life, the most reasonable explanation is he actually is who he said he is. He's God. And so I think it's really great that we've got a real figure that we can look at to work out, is there truth? And I think that we can find that Jesus is the truth.
Another topic is relationships. How do we have confidence in our relationships? How do we have confidence when we're not in relationships? I'm guessing some of you are married, some of you going out, some single. I've recently been divorced and single for a long time. And Sophie, I know you've spoken on singleness as well. How do you find confidence in God in relationships when you're not actually in a quote unquote relationship?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of my confidence and joy in being single comes from learning lessons the hard way and finding that there have been times where I have kind of been a Christian but have been tempted to, or dated non-Christian guys, knowing that, you know, that's not God's best for me. What I've found is I've never found peace when I'm outside of God's will, and to come back to a place of doing it God's way always fills me with such great peace. And so I've come to the position where I'm like, obviously, you know, I would like, you know, to get married, to have children, but I also think I've got to that point now where I'm like, I've learned enough. I know that I'd rather be single in God's will than in a relationship that's not God's will. I've seen quite a lot of that with friends and family members, people kind of settling or panicking and thinking, oh, I'm getting older, you know, particularly maybe with women, and just feeling like, oh, I've got to settle with someone, and, you know, he's not Christian or he doesn't seem right, but, you know, that kind of thing. And I get that, but I've just come to that place knowing that God is good to me in my singleness. And also the other thing is that people do think the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. And I think when you're single, it's easy to look at married people or couples and just think, oh, they have this, this, and this. But you're not realizing all the blessings God's given you, the time that he's given you that you can use to serve other people or just to do other things that he's called you to in life. And, you know, it's the same with married people or people with kids, you know, like you were just saying, Matt, that your life is mental because you've got these teenagers running around, and, you know, when do you get that time to do the things? You know, I'm fine. I can go and play snooker on a whim if I want to. I doubt that Matt can go and play snooker on a whim. So it's
when was the last time you played snooker, Matt?
A long time.
Yeah,
It was a long time ago.
Yesterday. So so I think that it's good to remind ourselves that what God's got for us, it looks different for every person, but he knows what's best for us.
And that there are relationships outside of a relationship as well, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah, really great community relationships within the church. And it's, as a single person, it's a good opportunity to serve families with children by being a babysitter, things like that. Which is very much needed. And, you know, I see my non-Christian friends with kids, they have the kind of, if they want to go out, they have to pay loads of money to someone they don't really know or trust. And it's just like, whereas in the church, you know, we've got this kind of really nice network of, you know, friends who are, you know, single, and they can come and look after the kids. And then you get the joy of spending time with the kids and the family, they get the help, and it works really well together. So yeah.
For any relationship, whatever stripe, whatever type, you've got to have a certain level of faith and confidence, don't you? And just, there's a risk attached to everything. And I think more broadly than the specifics of what we've been talking about, I do think that we're seeing, as we talked about isolation, we've talked about people enjoying being at home, working at home, being stuck in their bedrooms and in their houses for a few years, and then thinking, actually, it's quite comfortable here. I don't have to risk anything. Maybe I've not got any friends, but no one can hurt me, all those kind of things. I think it takes a huge amount of courage to step out and say, hey, I think it might be cool to hang out. We might get on, whether that's romantically, friendships, all those sorts of things, in the church, outside of the church. And I think that's one of the things that people are asking, and we must keep asking, must help people with. It's like, how can I be so confident in myself that I can take a risk and say, let's be friends, to the point where actually if you say no, it's gonna hurt me. And how do I be vulnerable with you to the point where actually if you know something about me I might not want you to yell about, and you might hurt me if you do. How can you be confident enough to do that? I think there are lots of people who are lonelier than they need to be, whether in romantic relationships or not, because there is a sense of, and I think this is a broad cultural issue, a sense of just like, how do I even do that? I think, how do I start those conversations, and what happens if it goes wrong? And as Christians, we can get crippled with the idea of, has God spoken? Is this right? And I think there's lots of good there, but I think if you can spend a long time thinking about whether to pursue friendship with someone and never do it, and find years down the line you're lonely. I think as someone who is no longer the youngest man in the room, I've got a mortgage and a child and things like that, finding friendships is really hard. Is suddenly you go through school, you've got like a ready-made class of 30, maybe you've got some mates in there. You go through uni, you've got people in your halls, people in your lecture theatre. Suddenly you're an adult, and you're an adult man. And I think that comes with all kinds of things in terms of just not being able to sit down and have a coffee and just be vulnerable and be best mates immediately. Like I need just time with people. I need like shoulder to shoulder. I need activities. It takes time and effort. And these are some of the questions I'm asking in my life. How do I do friendship well? And how do I be confident enough to step out in it? That, you might get hurt, those kind of things as well. I think more broadly, we need confidence to even start to talk about relationships. And I think maybe we've lost some of those social skills as well. I think particularly the younger generation, ask a teacher, ask an educator. I think the kids who have lost 2-3 years of education, school trips, going through year 6 into year 7, like all these different things, I think they do struggle with some of the things that you might just learn through trial and error. And those friendship building skills are lacking, and there's a lot of anxiety around that as well, I think.
Yeah, I think there's so much in what you've both just said. Matt, do you want to chime in? You've been married a while now, so I'm taking, you find it pretty easy, don't you?
Yes, I've got it nailed. That's right, yeah. No, married nearly 30 years. And my wife and I are parents of teenagers. Well, one's 12, one's 15, nearly. And so I just as George was speaking, then I was just thinking about the challenges for parents, and coming through a season where we were locked together as a family during COVID, threw up all sorts of challenges for us, and not just for us, but for other families in church life, but also families that are in our street, in the schools that we're connected with. And we've discovered that our children there's been a deficit in their lives. They've lost the ability to communicate. You throw in the kind of growth of mobile phone use. They've gone from what I'd call a child-based, a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood, and that's a big shock, and that is very detrimental to our culture, and even physically to our child's brains. And so I'm like a whole generation of parents who can't look to their parents, if they're still with us, to say, how did you do it with me, Mum? Because we're the first generation to have to handle it, and it's a disaster. And we're all learning. We're trying our best to navigate this challenge. I think we've made two errors. This is there's a guy called Jonathan Haidt who's written a book called The Anxious Generation, And he says we've made two mistakes as parents. One is that we've overprotected our children in the real world. In other words, we've got silly about letting them go into the park on their own and go and have a kickabout with their mates, or we've got scared about that, and we're constantly tracking them on our phones, the little blue dot, where are they? So we've overprotected them in the real world, but we've underprotected them in the virtual world. We've let this sewer pour into their brains from these little pocket computers that we've given them, and it's a disaster. And so we've got some untangling to do, and there's some good learning that's happening. And I'd encourage anyone that's in that situation to really reach out and get some help, and start talking about it with others.
Absolutely. I think I do have a lot of empathy for. I haven't really started parenting yet. My daughter's not even one. But even right at the beginning of this journey, I'm realizing how difficult it is for parents, because you get this, my algorithm immediately picked up somehow that I have a kid, and suddenly every other reel is someone telling me, don't feed your kid this or they'll die. And the next one is someone telling me, definitely feed them this because otherwise they're not getting what they need. And the next one is, don't change their nappies like this because that'll ruin their legs forever. And the next one is, don't even use nappies. And I think we get just a deluge of information, and having to decide as parents like what to do when I don't know the first reel from the second reel. I don't know the credentials. I don't know if this lady has got good intentions. I don't know anything about them, and yet I'm being all this information. I have to say my response is often just to shut down on all of it. And I can't even begin to engage with how many different people are telling me how to parenting is a strong word for what I do, like just sustaining, keeping a kid alive. This is overwhelming. So I think what Matt was saying, I think I'm just beginning to imagine what it must be like for parents to have to make decisions in a world that's changed so much, and decisions about how their kids should live their lives, interact with social media and things like that when they didn't have to in the same way. And then the deluge of information we have all the time. How many books, how many podcasts, how many things on social media, and how you can't read them all, you can't possibly do them all. And sometimes, and a lot of the time they're contradicting as well. How do you be confident in that? I don't know. I think that's a really good point.
Well, there's going to be a sermon on how do you stay confident when overcoming anxiety. So I think you'll be doing that one, George, and you'll be amazing at it.
I think Annie was going to say something.
Go for it, Annie.
Oh, just about parenting, I was going to say, I think that's one of the beautiful things about being in church family is you're shoulder to shoulder with often people the same age and stage, and you've got space to talk and pray and go, oh, what are you doing about this? And it's wonderful that you can be side by side with people that you trust, and also the truth of the Bible. I think you've got it. This thick book full of truth and goodness that is your plumb line. And I think that offers huge amount of confidence to me, because I think, okay, let's go back to the word and that will hold me steady. And let's pray and let's chat with friends and pray some more. But yeah, that definitely is a source of great confidence as I try to parent. We try to parent our three beautiful kids. Yeah.
And I'm guessing as a single person, because I was until recently that single person, while all this conversation is going on about kids and relationships, you're like, yeah, okay, I did just mention that I'm single, and being single is actually quite cool in a way, even though we're already talking about kids again now. And you can start to feel that actually being single, you just want to shout, being single is not a disability. It's a way of having a great life. And we need, as a church, to embrace the single community, because 50% of Brighton is single. Do you think I'm going to go back to you, Jesse, but do you think we're doing a good enough job at reaching the single community and giving them confidence to even be single?
No. To put it bluntly, I don't think so. I think I'm 19, moved to Brighton, and I've given my intern year a year of I made the pact with God before I moved. I was like, I'm going to do this year single, because something that I struggled with growing up was just getting affirmation from boys and what they thought about me and relationships. And I was like, I don't want to take that into my intern year, because this is a year that I have given strictly to God. And we had a talk from a woman who is just recently got married, and she's middle-aged. In our intern year, she came and preached about singleness, and that was really helpful. But I hadn't had any of that from I've been in Brighton for 9 months now, and I hadn't had any of that from being in Brighton. And it's nothing wrong with the church. Obviously, it's just a topic that isn't really talked about as Christians, I don't think, enough. And I think it needs to be, because it is a substantial part of your life. You are basically single in the years that you grow the most. And your brain stops developing at 25 years old, and people start getting into relationships in their early 20s. And it's okay, how do you navigate that when your mind you're still growing in your faith, and it's such an exciting time to grow in your faith, but you're throwing it away because you're worrying about, who am I going to marry? There's not a single guy in the church. There's not a single girl in the church my age that I'm attracted to or interested in. And it's, how do you navigate that when actually you shouldn't be focusing on that, but you should be focusing in on how God is shaping you in your youth. And I just think it is being chucked away. I think I've learned so much about it this year in choosing to be single. And I think I've really benefited from it. It's been really hard. It's been a really tough thing, especially moving to a new city with a big church where there is a lot of people my age who are single. So it's been a challenge, but I think it's been really fruitful for me to make that decision. But obviously it's a decision that I made, and not everybody makes it. So it's, how can we as a church get alongside the singleness and help people grow in confidence, like George said, to go out and talk to people and just be friends with them, but also how we can embrace singleness as a gift. And it's something that it's really exciting.
Francesca, I'm guessing running a podcast, a lot of these issues you're kind of covering day to day, right?
Yeah. This is actually a really interesting one to touch on, because I also agree. I don't think that the intimacy and that solitude time and that singleness season is actually spoken about enough. I think we actually run from it a lot of the time, and we're always looking for the next sort of stimulation, the next sort of excitement that can come into our lives and distract us from the purpose that God has for us. But I think it's so important, because it's through that intimacy with God in that season that you're able to build that confidence, that you're able to build that boldness, and that He's able to really empower you and send you out. And through that, what you've built in that secret place, you can stand firm on it, to know that when you are out there now, you won't be shaken, you won't be deceived, you won't be dismantled by what the world has to say or what the world has to offer. And so, recently I've did a Bible study with some girls, and we actually dived into Proverbs 31, because why not? And for me, when I was leading the discussion, I was just like, okay, let's actually scale it all the way back into the characteristics of this woman. Like, yeah, she's single, but what makes her a wife, even though she's not yet a wife? Because I think a lot of the times the single people in the church are just looking for their wife or their husband. And it's like, no, like, why is that your focus? Your focus needs to be, how can you get closer to God, or like, how can you build that relationship with Him? But anyways, going back to Proverbs 31, we were diving into the characteristics of this woman, and we find that she's trustworthy, she's diligent, she puts God first, all these different things. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what are you doing with the resources that God has given you today? Are you building those disciplines? Are you building those characteristics in your own life? And so, I think running from that solitude can actually be detrimental. But then on the other end, I do want to also add that I think one of the ploys of the enemy is to keep you in that solitude as well. But this is why it's so important to be close to God. Like, you and God got to be like this, so you know when it's time to go out. Because I definitely think the enemy tried to keep me in that place of, just being alone and not going out to make friends and finding community. Because when you're alone, you don't share your thoughts, and it's very easy for the darkness to creep in. And so I think sometimes when you're alone in darkness, that's not a very good place to be. So we're not telling you to do that. But I would say it is a difficult one to navigate. But don't stay in the darkness. Let the light come in. And then when God's ready to send you out, he will. And he will place those people in your life that can help to edify you and encourage you in the faith, and just have fun in life as well. Don't think too hard about it.
I liked what Sophie said about you often think the grass is greener. That can be whatever stage of life that you're in. And I don't know, it's helpful for me, I think, to realise whatever path of life you are on, it will be messy and it will hurt, as well as be wonderful and have amazing things as well. I think whatever path you're on, there'll be a mixture of those things. And what a key thing for me growing up was seek first the kingdom of God, and these things will be added. And I think whether that was in GCSEs or whether that was A-levels, or I ended up taking 3 gap years because I didn't want to go to uni. I worked in some night shelters and I lived in South Africa for a little bit. And another thing I loved from growing up was this: love God and do what you like. Because I feel like if he's your heart's desire to honour him and walk with him and serve him, almost doesn't matter what you do or where you go, because he can use you and you can honour him and serve him and love him and know his wonderful love for you in all of those places. So I think I'm more than happy to say that marriage is hard sometimes, and to have an honest conversation about that, because actually if God isn't filling me up, my marriage never will. And that's the same, again, whatever path you're on, if God is not satisfying you, it will be very impossible, let's say, to be satisfied in anything else. So I love this picture of a champagne tower where the first glass of champagne gets filled up and then it spills and spills and spills and spills. And I think that's how I want to live my life. Through Jesus being filled and pouring out into me, I can then be filled and pour out into other people. And I think, whatever stage you're on, whatever life path you're walking, if he's filling you, you will naturally spill out to people around you, whether that's in marriage or whether that's in singleness, whether that's in whatever, he's got to be the one that fills you up. And if you're full of him, I think going back to confidence, you can then be confident because he's good, and we can be confident in his goodness in our lives.
Nice. I think what you've both just touched on, and you mentioned it earlier, George, that idea of sharing vulnerability and just how important that is. To be honest, it's not something I'd ever imagined until everything went wrong in life, until everything sort of came crashing down and I couldn't do anything but share my vulnerability because it was literally all I had left. One of the topics that are going to be discussed is, where do we put our confidence when things go wrong? And I guess we know the obvious answer, but it's Jesus. But I mean, it's how do you go about, Tony, reminding yourself of that, going back to that when you're in a dark place and you just want to crawl under the duvet and just, watch Netflix for days?
Honestly, I think it's one of those things. I want to say it sounds easy, and it's often the simple things, but it's just the repetition. And I think it's holding on to certain Bible verses. I think when I think back to my lowest points, I very much remember it might be a single verse or two, and I might read that 5 times through the day, just reading it and sitting there because I had nothing else. As in, if you asked me to study this book of the Bible, it wasn't going to happen. If you asked me to pray for hours, it wasn't going to happen. But I needed a simple truth to kind of say back to myself over and over again. It doesn't matter what that truth is, wherever it is in that book. It's finding that simple truth that you can hold on to, because again, you might not have anything else that you can turn to, but it's simple truth regularly and often just helps me through low points.
Brilliant.
I love that. And I think we get an example of that when we look at the Psalms. A lot of the Psalms that David wrote were rants about his situation, confusion, but he always goes on a bit of a journey, where he begins to remind himself of the character of God and his goodness and his kindness and his mercy, and they become the foundation of trust for what they can't see, trust for believing in a God who can see round corners when we can't. That's right.
And Matt, another discussion topic is going to be money, obviously with an ongoing cost of living crisis, working as you are with sometimes the poorest in our community. How do you try to instill confidence in them when they're literally starving and living from one day to the next?
Yeah, so we've got 4 food banks in church life, and we see people coming into our food banks that look surprisingly okay. I think the reality is that people are feeling the pinch because they're trying to hold down a job and pay for a mortgage, and we've seen both of those contexts be tricky. And then the cost of living with the food and the utilities is just a huge challenge. I think the joy for us is being able to extend mercy, and I think we touched on listening earlier, and listening is certainly a huge part of what we do in our food banks. We've got great teams of volunteers that really press into that, and to serve people where they need serving. Very often we've discovered that actually the crisis of food is not the issue. What is the issue is a loss of work, or a mental health challenge, or family breakdown, or benefits have all got messed up, and we're able to help with those things. All of our food banks are brilliant signposting contexts, and so it's a real joy for us to put confidence back into people by being able to signpost them healthily. So it's a real joy.
I guess we're talking about confidence. There's a real danger in being confident about money, right? Because it's there one day and it's not, and we know only full well not to worship it. Yeah, that's always such a temptation. And then gift days come around. Matt, how do we remain confident in our finances at a time when everyone's feeling shorter than they were? Your money isn't worth what it was a year ago. How do you keep that confidence going? How do you maintain that?
I think I'd start by saying that generosity is a journey, and it's something that you learn. And at some point you come to the conclusion that, as Scripture says, God owns all the cattle on all the hills, and he owns all the gold. And so the quicker you come to terms with the fact that what's in your hands is a gift, and actually the call on my life, finances, whether they be little or large, it's a stewarding thing. How am I going to steward what God's given me? In our house, we've taken our kids on a very early journey of learning to steward money that they haven't earned. It's obviously, we don't push them up chimneys anymore, don't we?
It's not allowed.
That's not allowed. But we teach them to do 3 things: spend, save, and give. And so any money that comes their way, we're getting them on the journey as early as possible to think about giving. And so I didn't take my Christian walk seriously until I was well into my late 20s. And I think the journey at that point there is tough. So I think, hang on a second, everything I've got, I've earned. And I've had to come to the realization that actually, no, I woke up this morning and guess what? There was breath in my lungs. I was able to get out of the house and go and do a day's work and earn some money by the grace of God. And so I think the journey of generosity is not one that you ever come to a conclusion about, but I think the quicker you can realize that what you've got is not yours, and actually we've got the privilege of stewarding it well.
Right. So I'm guessing, an overarching sort of umbrella to this discussion when we're talking about a crisis in confidence is that we're living in a world in crisis, which more and more I think we're all just accepting is the case, or indeed we've been through multiple crises. And in the media, we love that word, and we'll turn it around to the next one, cost of living crisis. We are living in an environmental crisis, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was a pandemic, and now we've got major wars. Even the word World War III gets dropped, on a daily, weekly basis. George, how do we deal with the next crisis we're obviously, unfortunately, evidently, as things are going, gonna face?
Yeah, I think I know that on my own I will not cope. I will not cope with that. If World War III started, I can't even begin to comprehend that. But we had another pandemic by myself, I will not cope with that. It's too much for me. And so I think I know of myself because of the ways that I've reacted at my best potentially, or when I've reacted well, or when I've had a moment of reacting badly. I know eventually I'll get to the point of coming back to God. There's only ever been one place that I've found peace, and only been one person that I can go to who actually has the power to do anything about it. As well, he's not just a therapist that I talk to and sort of nods and listens, and then the world still sucks. But a God who's turning it around, who works all things for good. And so that's where I know I will go, because other avenues, even if I do try them first, will not, just won't hold up.
There's those terrifying snapshots of human nature you get nowadays when on a Sunday night everyone will watch David Attenborough and it'll show you a polar bear, running out of ice and emaciated and starving. We'll jump on Twitter and Instagram, say this is outrageous, we've got to do something. And then the next day we will go about our daily lives consuming exactly the way we did before and going in exactly the same direction. And it's almost like we're in this cruise ship that just can't turn.
Yeah, and I think from David Attenborough actually did a documentary on COVID-19 and how it shifted the natural world, which I actually did. So my EPQ, one of my A-levels, I did how, I kind of touched on that, but I did how single-use plastic affects marine life. And I just went into how when the world came to a pause and how all of our lives came to a pause, how actually the natural world and the world that God created came to life. And I found that really fascinating because we were like, oh, none of us are working, we're stuck inside. But I think it's seeing that God's creation just came through. And even if that's in our world, people becoming Christians because they're in a time of crisis, but also seeing his world just come to life. I think even in crisis, he still uproots us and he still comes through and brings things to life. And I think it's being reminded of that. There's so many movies out there where it's like the world is dead. This is so weird, but in the Lorax, it's like this guy goes around and chops down all of the trees. But there's one seed, and that seed then just renews that whole forest. And I think it's just reminding ourselves that in these times of crisis, God always plants a seed and will bring new growth. In those valleys of darkness, he brings new growth. And it's just being, just residing in that and having confidence in that he always finds that one seed and will bring growth out of that.
Brilliant. Right, the last two topics I got written down are how do you keep your confidence in God and how do you keep your confidence in the future? So how about we go around the table and you can choose one of them that you want to say. So how do you keep your confidence in God? How do you keep your confidence in the future? George, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think keeping your confidence in the future is very difficult. I think it's one of the pressing questions at the moment, I think, in the country. And I think I remember when we were thinking about having a kid and whether we should start a family. And around that time, I think it was sort of Russia invaded Ukraine. And we're sitting on the sofa and we're thinking, is it even the right thing to bring a child into the world when, I mean, at the time, in that week, you're thinking there's going to be a bomb going off. It's going to be, like, we just felt so crazy. How on earth can we be confident enough that in our child's 80, 90 years on the earth, that they're going to thank us for existing? Like, how can I be confident about that? I'm a Christian, and I teach, and I know these things, I know the answers, but you do just sit there and you think, how on earth can I be confident this is a good decision? And I think it comes down to, my confidence is actually not in the future. It's in the one who holds the future, the one who is guiding my steps. He's the one who I come back to each and every day. And the Bible talks a lot about, actually, enough for the day is its own trouble. Don't try and carry tomorrow, because you can't. Don't try and carry 80 years down the line, because you can't. Don't try and carry geopolitics, because you can't. What is God saying today? What's he calling you to? Who is he? Can you trust him? And that then gives you the peace to make decisions that, yes, will affect years down the line. So yeah, I think that's confidence in the future. I think it comes down to not necessarily actually having any confidence in what the future is going to be, but in the one who's directing it. And then confidence comes from that.
Sophie, how do you want to follow that rather good answer from George? It sort of encompassed everything, really.
I think what is really helpful is to let go of an idea of how you think things should be, or how the world, I think maybe less so nowadays, but certainly when I was growing up, there was this idea of, well, this is what happens, you get older, you get a job, you get married, you have kids. And I think if you can let go of this idea of this is what has to happen, and trust God that he's good enough to cover any and every situation, because although we're going through difficult times at the moment, it's not like, if you span the wheel of history and just put your finger down, you'll probably be in a worse situation there. There's always been wars, there's always been conflict, there's always been difficulty, and we actually live in a really, in many ways, a very privileged society. And obviously, yes, there could be war, but God has been there in wars in the past. I don't mean to be glib or flippant about it at all, but I do think that, I think a lot of the anxiety comes from when we have this really fixed idea of the way things should be. And if we can give that to God, and as I say, it's the same with what I referred to it with the singleness, but with other things, really, anything, then that frees us to be able to trust God day to day. Yeah.
Jessie, how about you?
I was going to wrap both of them in one answer like George did, but I think I'm coming out of my intern year and have absolutely no idea what to do. And I'm at peace with that and so chill about it, because I know that God's got me. And one example of that was going into this intern year was I was making the decision whether to do uni or to do the internship. And my parents were like, do uni and then do the internship, because then you've got your uni degree and etc. And I was like, I don't want to go to uni. And I think I've always been someone who's been like, I don't really care about following the rules that society has like planted in front of me. So doing the internship, God provided really through that. And I think that's just given me so much confidence, seeing that he is our provider. He is our good God and he's got us. And my parents always used to say this thing that we've got you and God's got us. So whenever I was anxious with A-level exams or whatever it was, my dad would say, don't worry, we've got you and God's got us. And I think just growing up and having my parents remind me of that every single time that I was like, I can't do this, it's just really, it's just affirming. And I've taken that into my intern year and now taking it out of it. And I'm like, okay, God's got me. And I know that he's got a plan for me, and having just peace with that and being like, okay, I'm holding my life in my hands open to you, God, because you created this whole world and you know every corner of it and you know everything that's going on. And just that I find that really exciting, that I know nothing and he knows everything. I think it's so exciting. And I think it's reminding yourself to rejoice in the times where you're like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. And then rejoicing in those times and being like, but God does. And then also rejoicing in the times where you're like, I know everything that's going on. It's like rejoicing in the good and in the bad. And yeah, it's just trying to flip your perspective. It's like, okay, I've been thinking too negatively about it this way, so I'm going to totally flip it around and look at it from the other direction. And that other direction is always God, isn't it? It's always the opposite to anxiety. So, yeah.
Nice. So, Dave, you want to have a go?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, I think what keeps me comfortable about the future is just knowing that I've got nothing to do with it. I think in the sense of, even with my best effort, I couldn't shape the life that I want. And even to be perfectly honest, the life that I want might not be the best that God has for me. So really, what am I doing? I think I often think of, like, I often have a bit of a Job moment where I'm looking at God going, God, what is this? What is my life? And God just humbly, just quietly in his nice, gentle way just says, where were you when I was figuring out the rest of this? Where were you when I was thinking about the little detail and working through all these things? And it just helps me sit there and go, oh, actually, I could panic and I could break down about tomorrow and it wouldn't change a thing about tomorrow. So almost in some ways that helps me put it all down again and go, actually, you know what, God, you've got so much better, and I can just rest in that, rest in knowing that actually, yeah, it was never me making all of this work. God, you've been there since the very start and you'll be there after me. So that's how I rest in the future.
Amen.
Oh my days, these are so good. I realise now why we chose you for the panel. Annie, how about you?
No pressure. Yeah, I don't want to be too down. I think we've had some quite big tragedy in the last couple of years, and it's made me realise how I'm not in control of anything, and bad things do happen. Like worst case scenarios do happen. And so I think a good thing that's come out of that is me thinking about heaven more than I've ever thought. And yeah, studying about heaven a bit more, reading the Bible a bit more with an eye to heaven and the future, and the reality of the hope that we have in Jesus and in what he's accomplished and what is coming. So I think looking to the future, my hope is that Jesus has got it all, and one day all will be well. And if it's not all right now, it's not the end. So it will be all right in the end. And that gives me a hope and a confidence for the day to day. But also just pressing into God in the middle of hard stuff and in the middle of good stuff. You realise he's faithful, and everything else is shifting sand. And when you step onto him, he's solid and he's a rock. And I don't know how, but you wait on the Lord, you renew your strength, and that gives you, hope for the day, strength for the day, hope for the future, strength for the day, hope for the future. So I think, having a perspective of heaven, and that whatever we're doing day to day, we're not doing it as those without hope. We've got a sure, solid hope and a sure, solid foundation. because of who Jesus is and what he's done and what he's won. Got there in the end.
You did beautifully. Matt, it is a really scary time, isn't it? You know, and when you were just talking about having a kid, I mean, you know, we are living in an environmental and nature crisis above it all. Having a kid is the worst thing you can do for the environment. And yet, I'm about to take on a child who I absolutely adore. We quite like another one. And it feels like almost that's a morally wrong decision. Matt, where do we get our confidence from in the future? How do we retain our confidence in God at such pressing times?
Yeah, again, I think I want to just turn to Scripture. I was reminded of the hilarious context where Jesus says some very hard things, brings some very hard teaching, and loads of people who've been following him walk away. And he looks to the disciples that are left there thinking, wow, what have you just said? And he says, so are you going to go as well? And I don't know how long it would have taken them to come to the conclusion, but they said, well, where do we go? You've got the words of eternal life. And I think if that's how those guys related to Jesus, then I want to do that as well. Honestly, I can't think, where else would I go? If I wasn't a Christian, where would I be? I don't know. Just so grateful that my bedrock of confidence is Christ.
Yeah, there are those times where we just hold on, right? Just literally for a minute. Francesca,
Yeah.
where do you get your confidence from?
It's a very big question.
I know it is. And I was going to sum it up in 2 words, so I won't do that now.
Yeah. Even though tomorrow isn't promised, I have hope for the future because my hope is in God and in the fact that he's built a resume in my life and in the lives of others. There has been countless amount of times that he's saved me, healed me, provided for me. And I could sit here all day long, and we could all sit here all day long and talk about, you know, our testimony of how good he is and just his glory. Our lives are a testimony. I remember when I first moved here, I thought I could prepare and get ready for the move financially and spiritually and all these different things. And I actually ended up coming here with nothing. And it was so funny how it all happened because I was working throughout the summer, tried to save up all my money. And just as I was moving here and looking for a place, I got scammed and all that money got taken from me. And in those moments, you hear the outside voices of, where are you going? You shouldn't go anywhere. How are you going to survive? What do you think you're doing? I just had to like place my faith. I just had to have faith and hope in God because he had already built a resume in my life. So knowing that he would provide for the vision that he gave me. And so I came here on a whim, but it wasn't really a whim because my faith and my firm foundation is in God. And so now I'm sitting here today and I'm able to say that I graduate next week and I've already paid off all of my tuition, and that's been over like 50K in pounds, and I'm Canadian. So y'all do the math and the currency exchange there, but it's only by his grace. It's only by his glory. And so my hope for the future is in the fact that I can remember the past and I can remember today and I can remember that also for the lives of other people. And yeah, he's the same God yesterday, today, and before, and tomorrow. And so, yeah, just remembering that gives me so much hope. And even for the next seasons of my life, because obviously I'm single right now, which I'm totally fine with. But
And
just
you should be.
yeah, and just understanding that yeah. So the way I look at it is like, if your mom tells you she's cooking dinner, go set the table. You gotta go set the table, but you gotta take your time to put out the utensils, the cups, the napkins. Like my family does it big, so you know we have to put the whole table spread on there. And so, and the way I look at it is that's us. Like God is telling us set the table because he has such a huge meal, a delicious meal coming for us. And my trust is just knowing that, just knowing that and trusting that. And it's quite fun, as they've said already. It is really fun, really exciting. So I'm excited and I'm happy.
Nice. That's very upbeat and positive. I like that. I remember I was sitting in this room once and I was not in the best place. And someone on the stage was talking about putting on the armor of God and how he wakes up every morning and he puts on the armor of God and he takes his time to think about, the belt and the breastplate and the boots and the shield and the helmet of salvation, and it just gives him strength for the day that he's wearing that armor, And when he gets home at night, he takes the armor off and it's all battered. This is completely someone else's story, so I'm just basically borrowing it from home. But he just puts it in the closet and it's completely battered and tarnished. And then when he wakes up in the morning, it's all like fresh and gleaming and new again. And he puts it on again and goes about his day. And it's just, life is hard.
Yeah.
But we got to keep trusting somehow, and even sometimes if it is second by second, moment by moment, you got to keep trusting that he's in control and he's good. Mm-hmm. Thank you all for chatting this evening. It's been really good. And these sermons are coming to you very soon.